incredible sense to us, and some of it is very obscure and vague, and quite honestly, we don't really know what to do with some of it. There is, however, one main overarching point that is easily made, and that's the one we're going to grab tonight. As I told you last week, we've now reached the point where Jacob is getting close to death. And Jacob has tunnel vision with his boys. They're all in Egypt now, remember? And they are prospering in the land of Goshen. Their cattle are doing well. They're doing well. While the Egyptians were becoming slaves to Pharaoh, they are prospering and doing great. They're comfortable. Joseph's the number 2 man in charge. And yet, as Jacob is about to die, he has tunnel vision to make sure his sons know one thing. What is that one thing? This is not home. I don't care how comfortable you get here. I don't care how prosperous you get here. I don't even care how long we stay here. And by the way, does anybody know how long they're going to stay in Egypt? Huh? Nope. Nope. 450. Yeah, you were close. Yeah.
I'm going to say 700, but that's too much.
Oh, that was closer than 70. So, all right. 450 years they're going to be in Babylon. Anybody know how old the United States is? 200 or something, you don't know? What? I can't hear you. Founded in 1607, the United States of America?
But like the area.
And I'll tell you, where's the Matador principal when you need him?
1492.
Yeah. There you, 8,000. Let there be light, right? Yeah. The United States of America is just nearly 250 years old. We get to 2026, that'll be 250. So they're going to be in Egypt way longer than the United States has even been here. How easy is it then to get comfortable in a land? To think this is home, especially if you're one of the Israelites that's born in Egypt, and that's all you ever know. And your family, how many of you know where your ancestors came from? Does anybody know where yours come from? Yeah, you came from Germany. You know where yours came from, Taylor? Germany also? We might be kin, right? Anybody know where they came from? What?
Last time you were sending them to Russia.
Well, I was going to send him to Russia because we're from Germany. There's a reason we do that. So, Taylor, I don't need you blowing my cover, right? Yugoslavia, maybe? Yeah, probably. Antarctica, anybody? Point is, we've got relatives that are from Germany, and I think Pennington, that sounds English, doesn't it? That's Cary, they're Pennington. So you understand there's people that from all over, but if I tell you want to move back to Germany, you're like, no, not particularly. And I'd say, but that's your land. That's your people, right? I mean, what if you were Scottish, right? Be your land. You're like, you look great in a kilt, Zach. A really long one. Yeah. And you say, I want any part of that. I don't want to go back there. I'm American, right? I was born in America. More than that, I'm Texan, right? Which is the best part of America. This is where I'm at. West Texan, nonetheless, right? I mean, we're right here in the promised land. Why would we ever want to leave and go back? It'd be real easy to adopt that point of view. Now, maybe not later. And by the way, that's part of the reason God allows for that slavery. If you want to think about, we've talked about providence in the life of Joseph. Have you ever wondered why God allows them to come into Egypt with such grace and prosperity and blessing, and by the time it's time for them to leave Egypt, they are the slaves? You know, we've heard all the stories about having to tromp the mud pits and make bricks and cut their own straw, and how they're treated roughly and badly by Pharaoh, and they're supposed to throw their sons into the Nile and drown them. And it's an awful place. Have you ever wondered why God allowed it to get so hard for them in Egypt? Maybe. So that when Moses comes along and says, let's go, they'll say, let's do it. Sometimes the adversity and trials you face here is for no other purpose than to get you to let go of this place and fix your eyes on heaven. I think it's by no coincidence that as you get older, life gets harder. I hear it all the time from older folks that you got to be tough to grow old. Does anybody agree with that?
What you saying?
Yeah. Peggy agrees. I never met a better whiner than Peggy. Peggy can whine in 7 different languages and 3 different emotions. When you get older, life gets harder. Your body starts, you don't move, you got more aches and pains, and the things you used to could do, you can't do anymore, right? You used to go out and play basketball or baseball or pickleball, and then when you get older, you're like, no, I'll just sit here and watch them do it, right? There's a difference why when we have Disciple Now, we put y'all in air up balls on slick tarps and you bounce off each other. And when we have Disciple Still, they play dominoes in the fellowship hall, right?
And we were good.
It's narrative, yeah. So, and part of that, I'm not saying it's the only reason why life gets harder when you get older, but part of that is that as you get older and you prepare, God prepares to take you to eternity, that it is easier for you to let go of this world. And sometimes that's what trials and tragedies are for. And that's exactly what will happen in Egypt. But right now, everything's good and comfortable. And Jacob has had but one objective for his sons: don't get comfortable here. This is not the inheritance. This is not the birthright. This is not the blessing. This is not the land. Our land is in Canaan. And we saw that last week as Jacob gave Joseph the birthright. Joseph received it. And why did Jacob get the birthright? Do you remember? Because God wanted him to, right? Don't fall into the trap and say Joseph deserved it. Joseph was a good son. He was the good son. And if you wanted to measure it by human merit, you could make a case to say that of all the sons of Jacob, Joseph probably did deserve it the most. But the reality is nobody deserved that land. Joseph didn't deserve to be a great-grandson of Abraham. Joseph didn't deserve to be chosen of God. He didn't deserve to be one whom God would allot the portion of this land. He didn't deserve that. Nobody deserved that. God doesn't demonstrate out his blessings by merit. He does it by grace. You receive what you don't deserve from God. You don't earn a thing of it. Well, we're continuing on that theme. And now we get to chapter 49. If you remember, we said the last 3 chapters of Genesis are one theme, and we call it Beyond Egypt. That's what we're learning, Beyond Egypt. And so now we get to chapter 49, and Jacob is about to prophesy over his sons. Very important reality that we learn here is he prophesies over his sons. This land of Egypt is not your home. This is not where you stay. Turn over, before we get into that, however, I should have told you just turn there to begin with. Turn to Hebrews 11. Way on the other side. Hebrews 11. And see if you can't see Jacob in the passage we're about to read. Hebrews 11. Somebody read 13 through 16 of Hebrews 11.
All who died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen him and having welcomed him from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. And indeed, if they have been thinking of that country from which they were kicked out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a Savior.
All right. Notice it says that they are strangers and exiles on the earth. And if they'd been thinking of that country from which they went out, they had opportunity to return. Let me ask you a question. Could Jacob have gone back to Canaan? Yeah. If he'd wanted to, he would have had opportunity. Your son is the number 2 guy in all of Egypt. You don't think he could have? Did Jacob want that plot of land? Was that what he was after? What did Jacob want? Okay, heaven, yes. He wanted the promise of God, right? So even when he's telling his sons, this is not our home, it's not just that Jacob is saying that land is better than this land. What he wants is the promise of God. The reason that land is better than this land is because that's the land God promised us. They're after the promise of God, not just some patch of dirt. You get that in Hebrews 11. Look over to Hebrews, chapter 12. Look at verses 28 and 29. And listen to the writer of Hebrews talk to the people of his day about seeking a better country. Somebody read Hebrews 12, 28 and 29.
Therefore, since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us show gratitude by which we may offer to God an acceptable service with revenue and all. For our God is a consuming fire.
Not revenue,
Thank you, friends.
reverence.
Did I say revenue?
Yes.
Yeah, you've been taking too many accounting tests lately, yeah. Reverence, right? Now, the writer of Hebrews, and just a little backstory on the Hebrews, these are Jewish people that have confessed Jesus as their Lord, but because of persecution, namely, in fact, they're being told they can no longer come to the synagogue, they can no longer come to the temple, they no longer have access to the altar, no longer can you participate in the Passover or the Day of Atonement or the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Weeks or any of the other feasts that they participated in. Everything that they understood to be assigned to their atonement, everything they were used to, they grew up believing that when you wanted forgiveness before God, you brought this sheep on the Day of Atonement, and the priest killed that goat, or you brought a sheep during the Passover, and it caused the Lord to pass over your sins. And now they're being told that if you stay with Jesus, you can no longer do any of those things. And the reality is this: Jesus better be right? I mean, if you're a Jew and you're going to leave all that behind, he better be right. And that's what the writer of Hebrews is writing for, to tell them he is right. He is. He's better than anything you ever had in Judaism. If you follow the structure of Hebrews, he's better than the angels. He's better than Moses. He's better than Aaron, the high priest. He's better than Abraham. He's better than any sacrifice, any goat, any sheep, any bull that was ever brought. Jesus is better. And here in Hebrews 12, he is reminding these Jews who will lose their earthly kingdom. You will be ostracized. You will be cut off from Judaism. You will lose your allotment of the land so far as they understand it. And the writer of Hebrews says, so what? We have a kingdom which can't be shaken. It's not the only place he says it. Look at Hebrews chapter 13, verses 12 to 14. Hebrews 13, 12 to 14.
Wherefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people through his own blood, suffered outside the gate. So let us go out to him outside the camp, bearing his reproach. For here we do not have a lasting city, but we are seeking the city which is to come.
All right, so in other words, in your day, let's say that our church represented some sort of religion, and you always believed that in order to be saved, you had to come to our church, and you had to take the Lord's Supper off of this table. And that was the only way that you were forgiven of your sin. And so you grew up your whole life thinking that the only measure you had to be forgiven was if you came to this church and took the Lord's Supper off this table. But then you started to believe in Jesus. And everybody in the church said, well, listen, you got to choose. It's either going to be Jesus or the Lord's Supper at this table. And if you try to stick with Jesus, you can no longer come here. And it really makes your faith get real. I mean, what are you trusting in? And the writer of Hebrews tells them, look, when Jesus died and Jesus suffered to sanctify the people through his death on the cross, does anybody know where he suffered? What does the writer of Hebrews say? In verse 12, he suffered outside the gate. He wasn't in the midst of Jerusalem. He didn't suffer in the temple. Remember, they took him to the hill called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull. And he went and suffered outside the gate. That was the cross. And the writer of Hebrews says, you want an altar? That's your altar. That's the new altar. And he says in verse 13, let's go out to him. Let's leave the camp. Let's bear his reproach. Here in this building, we don't have anything that will last. We're seeking the city that will. Now that's the same message Jacob is preaching to his sons. Here in Egypt, as comfortable as it is, as nice as it is, as in control as we seem to be, we don't have anything that lasts. By the way, if you want the analogy, Egypt would be to you this world. Egypt would be to you the United States of America. Egypt would be to you the comfort of maybe your, not your job. I don't know how many of you in here have a job. We got 3 with jobs, 4 with jobs. All right. It's not, those are not your comforts. Those are not your securities. Those aren't things that last. We're looking for what will. And so we always fix our eyes on the inheritance. And that's exactly what Jacob wants to remind his sons of. Now he's going to do this by divvying out for them their allotted inheritance, which is quite interesting because, as we said last week, why is it interesting that Jacob is divvying out the land of Canaan to his sons? He didn't even own the land, right? I mean, didn't I give you some land last week? I gave somebody some land last week. I gave Zach some land in Russia. That's right. Hope you enjoy it, son. Yeah. Anybody else would you like some land in Australia, Elias? You want it in the outback or you want it on the coast? All right, 100 acres on the coast to Elias, right? It's yours. Don't even ask any questions. Just go move right in, right? That's kind of the absurdity of it. That's what Jacob's doing. It's your land. It's yours. Well, let's work our way through this. Now, he's going to break this up. He's going to do it boy by boy pretty much, except he limped Simeon and Levi together. But the order he's going in is that first he's going to deal with the sons of Leah. Then he's going to deal with the sons of the midwives, or the concubines, or the maids, whichever you want to call them. And then he's going to deal with the sons of Rachel last. And we're going to learn partly what God would teach each one of these boys individually, but more than that, I want you to get, as we're done here, the corporate lesson that all of the boys could learn from this mini will reading of Jacob and what we could learn for our own lives. So let's start with Reuben. Somebody read verses 1 through 4 of Genesis 49.
Then Jacob summoned his sons and said, "Assemble yourselves, that I may tell you what will befall you in the days to come. Gather together and hear, O sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. Uncontrolled as water, you shall not have preeminence. Because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it, you went up to my couch."
All right, so Reuben has the distinction of being what? The oldest, yeah, the firstborn, right? And the firstborn always got the birthright. The firstborn always got the blessing, right? And so there has to be at least a little part of Reuben here who, when Dad says, "Come together, guys, I'm going to prophesy over you," there has to be somewhere in the back of Reuben's mind this hope that, maybe Dad's forgotten all that went on. And maybe now we've been in Egypt. Now, what did I say last time? They've been in there like, how long? I don't remember now. It seemed like 17 years they've been in Egypt. That's a long time, right? Older than most of you are. And you got to think that somewhere in the back of Reuben's mind, he's wondering if maybe now Dad will go ahead and give me, the right, the birthright, the blessing, if I'll get the lion's share, if all will be right. And it starts off well for Reuben. "Reuben, my firstborn, you are my might and the beginning of my strength," right? You could feel Reuben's chest puffing out a little bit, can't you? He says, "Reuben, you are preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power." Does anybody know what preeminent means? Anybody here, when they talk to a ruler, they say your eminence, right? Call someone who's preeminent. Anybody know what that means? Anybody over here? Preeminent? Preeminent means above everybody else. No comparison. We talk about Christ being preeminent all the time. That he is above and beyond everyone and everything in every possible way. So Jacob starts off by telling Reuben, "You're my firstborn. You are the very epitome of my might. You are the very beginning of my strength. There is no one like you in dignity. There is no one like you in power." And Reuben's got to be saying, "You got that right?" Mm-hmm. Problem is, Reuben, you are uncontrolled like water. Nobody can make you do anything. You shall not have preeminence. In other words, by all accounts, human, you are the logical choice. If we were measuring this thing by human merit, human dignity, human strength, good looks, wit, education, age, every possible human reason we could have for making you the preeminent one of the family, you have it, except one problem. You're unpredictable, you're uncontrolled, and Jacob has remembered something about Reuben, and what was that? You might remember what he did? Yeah, he slept with his father's concubine. "You defiled my father's couch," he says. "You defiled the bed. And because of that, you do not get preeminence." Now, let's just stop right there. That's certainly a lesson for Reuben, but it's also a lesson for all the boys, don't you think? What sort of lesson might we be learning here? Oh, Jacob doesn't forget easily. That's true. I mean, yeah, he didn't. It's been a lot of years since that happened. All right, worldly standards don't matter. That's true. That's a lesson we've learned over and over in the book of Genesis, right? It's all by grace, not by merit. A simple thing that we're going to learn, and by the way, you're going to see it with the next two boys too, is that iniquity gets punished, right? That's a gospel reality. Iniquity gets punished. God deals with sin. That's just true. And you see that. Move on to the next two boys, 5 through 7. Somebody read about Simeon and Levi, the other sons of Leah.
"Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are implements of violence. Let my soul not enter into their counsel. Let not my glory be united with their assembly. Because in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they lame oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will disperse them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel."
All right, so what was Simeon and Levi's big gaffe? Do you remember? They did kill a bunch of people. Why? Do you remember? yeah, a guy raped their sister, and they were like, okay, yeah, we'll marry you, but you guys all need to be circumcised. And when they agreed and they were all in pain from circumcision, Simeon and Levi went in and killed them all. But it's not just justice, because they also killed women and children and stole all their livestock. And right? I mean, it was more than just justice. It was vengeance and murder and wickedness and violence. And because of that, Jacob says, boys, you don't have what's in it to be the preeminent ones. You don't get to rule. You don't get to be the head of the family because you're violent men. And violent men are not going to be in charge. And there again, we learn the same lesson that we would learn with Reuben, and that is that iniquity gets punished. There are consequences of sin. The consequence here is that you will be dispersed in Jacob and scattered in Israel. So we're talking about Simeon and Levi. Interesting fact, when the land gets divvied out amongst the 12 tribes of Israel, how much land does Levi get? You may know. I heard it over there from a wannabe youth. It was Tommy. And then I heard a tattletale. Yeah, okay. Yeah. None. Levi doesn't get any land because they were the priestly tribe and the Lord was their portion. They didn't get any land. They get dispersed among the 12 tribes. You might know about, yes, sir?
Sorry. Is there a certain reason that they're like grouped together all the time?
Who?
Simeon and Levi, are they like twins, or are they just like?
Oh, no, they're not twins.
similar in-
They just, it's like you and Caleb joined at the hip, right? Just inseparable. No, it's just because they're born of the same mother, mostly. And Simeon, interesting fact about Simeon, when it came time to divvy out his land, Judah had so much that they just told Simeon, you just go live in the midst of Judah. I mean, that's like saying, Zach, your brother has such a big house, just go live in one of his rooms. It's kind of what they do with Simeon. That's part of the punishment, which Jacob says. And then we move to the fourth brother. Chapter 49, verse 8 says, Judah, your brothers shall praise you, your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies, your father's son shall bow down to you. Now stop right there. Where have we seen that before? Joseph's dreams. And in Joseph's dreams, all the brothers are going to bow down to him. Now we didn't know what that meant at first. But later on we figured out what it meant. What was the significance of the brothers bowing down to Joseph? What did that mean that Joseph was going to become to his brothers? A savior, right? You might have thought at first, well, he's going to be a ruler. And he is, and so will Judas be. But he was a ruler for the purpose of saving his brothers. And now that promise and prophecy that we saw fulfilled in Joseph is now uttered again, only it's given to Judah. Your father's sons will bow down to you, talking about the glory and saving power of Judah. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you've gone up. He couches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who dares rouse him up? We talk about his power. You don't mess with him. He's going to be the preeminent power. It should have been Reuben, but it's going to be Judah. He goes on to verse 10. Somebody read that.
The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people.
What does it say? What does it mean when it says the scepter shall not depart? What's a scepter? Right? Yeah, this is your power rod, right? The scepter that you carry around. The ruler's staff that he holds. No one's going to take it from him until Shiloh comes. The word Shiloh means peace or rest. And just as we find out about the Lord Jesus, he is the Prince of Peace. And to him shall be the obedience of all the peoples. Everybody's going to bow down to him. You want to see the prosperity of his reign? He ties his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choicest vine. Now, I don't know if any of you ever raised a garden at all? You have raised a garden? What'd you grow?
Watermelon, cucumbers, tomatoes.
Okay. What's your favorite thing in the garden?
Cucumbers, because they grow really easy and take over everything, so just because of
What's your favorite thing to eat in the garden?
strawberries.
Strawberries, all right. So, we never had much luck growing strawberries, but we'll say Aaron does. You grow great strawberries. And then one day, Caleb brings home a goat. And so you decide to tie the goat to the strawberry cage, right? Is that a good move? Why? Because the goats eat everything, right? Well, here you have a vineyard, and it says the choicest vine, which is your best grapes, and what do? They tied the donkey to it. What do you think the donkey's going to do? Now, Who did that? Gage. Okay. That was a good donkey, Gage. Yeah. Now, why do they not seem to care that the donkey is tied to the choicest vine? What? No. Because you got so many grapes it don't matter, right? Because it's doing so, it doesn't matter. Who cares? I got strawberries running out the wazoo, right? Wazoo is a Hebrew word that means a whole lot. Not really. I just made that up. Running out the wazoo, okay? It says he washes his garments in wine. I mean, who does that? His robes in the blood of grapes. That's wine also. That's what you call the blood of grapes. His eyes are dull for wine. He's got more wine than he knows what to do with, right? I mean, he's got grapes everywhere, wine everywhere. He can do it. I mean, it's just abundant prosperity. His teeth are white from milk, and just, he's doing good, okay? That's the prosperity of the kingdom. So you get this massive blessing promise on Judah. Now, here's what's interesting. Why did Reuben get restricted from being the preeminent one? He defiled his father's bed. He's uncontrollable. He was an adulterer, immoral, right? And why did Simeon and Levi get restricted from being the preeminent ones? Because they're murderers, they were violent. And what do you know about Judah? He was all those things, right? He was immoral and an adulterer. He was a violent man. I mean, whose idea was it to sell Joseph to begin with? Yeah. So he's every bit as bad as the three that went before him. And again, once again, if you're Simeon and Levi and Reuben, you're going, why Judah? Why Judah? God wanted Messianic line, but grace. And so where else do we learn about the gospel? Sin is punished, but grace abounds. Right? God is gracious. Isn't it interesting that even though Reuben, Simeon, and Levi have offended their father, they weren't kicked out. They weren't treated as Esau was treated. They weren't treated as Ishmael was treated. They still receive an inheritance. They're still part of the lineage, even though disciplined. But then when God determines to divvy out his ultimate blessing, he divvies it out by grace, because none of the brothers deserve this. God gives it by grace to whom he will. Well, we've been learning that, haven't we? And now we move on to the next segment of boys. And the next segment is the sons of the maid: Zebulun, Issachar, Dan, Gad, Asher, Naphtali. We'll read them pretty quick. Zebulun will dwell at the seashore, and he shall be a haven for ships, and his flank shall be towards Sidon. We don't know a lot as to why that was given to him, but again, it's interesting that Jacob just gave him coastland in a land he didn't own, right? It's laughable when I tell Elias, you can have 100 acres in Australia. He's like, yeah, whatever. But that's, I mean, that'd be like Christmas morning. You open up your present, and from your parents it says, I got you 100 acres in Australia. You'd be like, thanks, Mom and Dad, right? But that's what he gives him. Verse 14, Issachar is a strong donkey. I'm trying to think who I want to start calling Issachar from here on out. Lying down between the sheepfolds, when he saw that a resting place was good and that the land was pleasant, he bowed his shoulder to bear burdens and became a slave at forced labor. And so Issachar, it's prophesied to him that he's not going to be a fighter. He's going to be a servant. He's going to be a worker. Verse 16, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a horned snake in the path that bites the horse's heels so that his rider falls backward. Dan, by the way, his name means to judge, and Jacob seems to go off of that and says, Dan, your name means judge, you will judge. You're going to judge the tribes of Israel. And notice Jacob puts in here just a little parenthetical statement in verse 18 to sort of direct the thought of his brothers. And what's that statement? For your salvation I'll wait, O Lord. Just in case you wondered where your father was going with all this, he points you to salvation. Gad, by the way, means good fortune. And look at verse 19. As for Gad, raiders shall raid him, but he will raid at their heels. In other words, everything you steal from him, he's going to steal it right back. He's going to succeed. As for Asher, his food shall be rich, and he will yield royal dainties. I mean, that's a prosperous picture. Naphtali is a doe let loose. He gives beautiful words. I don't know, a poet, a singer, whatever. Now, what you get from these boys that don't deserve it, because even though they're not the main players like Reuben or Simeon or Levi or Judah, who we know did vile things, they were all right there with them during the selling of Joseph. They were all right there with them in that iniquity and immorality. They also could not be trusted whenever Joseph was trying to find one trustworthy brother among them. I mean, they're no better than the rest, and yet every promise that's given, and some of it we don't understand because we don't know much about the boys. It made sense to Jacob, but what you get is that God is pouring out blessing upon these boys. They don't deserve it, but they're receiving it. They haven't done anything in their life. I mean, what's the best thing any of these boys ever did? They have no resume, no nothing that's like give them the Man of the Year award, and yet they're all having blessing heaped upon them. And then we come to Joseph, and more so than a prophecy, Joseph's is more of an account of his life and struggle. Somebody read 22 through 26 about Joseph.
Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring, whose branches climb over a wall. With bitterness archers attacked him. They shot at him with hostility, but his bow remained steady. His strong arm stayed with him, because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel. Because of your father's God, who helps you, because of the Almighty, who blesses you. With blessings in the sky above, blessings in the deep springs below, blessings of the breast and womb. Your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains, than the bounty of the angel hills. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers.
All right, so we start off with Joseph. It said, boy, Joseph, you were something. A fruitful bow, fruitful vine, right? A vine by a spring. I mean, you got plenty of water. Your branches just took off over the wall, but the problem was what? Yeah, jealousy. They attacked him, tried to bring him down, but did it ultimately make him fall? No, right? And ultimately, Joseph ends up with blessing. And there's a lesson to be learned there, too. This life will have its share of hardship. And there is a blessing of God, and there is a promise of God, but that does not mean there won't be hardship in your life, even those who would be prescribed as the favorite of the Father. With Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the spoil. And so you have Benjamin again, who shows up to be victorious. Now verse 28 says, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is what their father said to them when he blessed them. He blessed them, every one, with a blessing appropriate to him. Then he charged them and said to them, I'm about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought along with the field from Ephron the Hittite for a burial site. There they buried Abraham and his wife Sarah. There they buried Isaac and his wife Rebekah. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it, purchased from the sons of Heth. When Jacob finished charging his sons, he drew his feet into the bed and breathed his last, and he was gathered to his people. So the final statement, and you just look at this as a whole, I would tell you there's a lot about the specifics of those prophecies made to those sons that is really just a guess as to exactly what Jacob meant by all of it. But the one thing that is blatantly obvious is that he is taking their gaze from the here and now and moving it to the future. When he talks to the blessing of his boys, he doesn't say, Issachar, there's great land over here in Goshen, and I hope for you to be a great shepherd and raise lots of sheep. I hope for you to be a great architect and someday build mighty buildings in the land of Egypt. And I hope for you to enjoy this area by the Nile, the fertile land of the Nile, when it overflows and leaves behind all the sediment. You can grow anything in Egypt because of the waters of the Nile. And I would bless you over here with all of your livestock. And Joseph, you are the preeminent leader in Egypt. And I would say raise sons that can lead in Egypt and continue to rule and dominate this land. He doesn't say anything about that. It would be like me giving an inheritance to my kids, and it had nothing to do with anything we have here. Nothing to do with the land here, nothing to do with our possessions here, nothing to do with jobs here, notoriety here. Everything is for somewhere in the future distant. And that's how Jacob speaks to his sons. It is to remind them of that one overarching point. We have nothing here that lasts. We are seeking a city which is to come. And by the way, I would tell you, this is not just a encouragement to believers. This is a requirement for believers. Turn over to the book of Philippians. We're nearly done. Philippians chapter 3. Philippians 3. And somebody read 17 through 21.
Brethren, join in following my example, and observe those who walk according to the pattern you have in us. For many walk, with whom I have often told you, and now tell you even weeping, that they are enemies of the cross of Christ, and whose end is destruction, whose God is their appetite, and whose
Paul starts out and says, all right, listen, brothers, I want you to do what I do. And I want you to do what those who walk and live like me do. Because there is a faulty example out there. You see it in verse 18, there are many who live wrong, he says. I've told you about them a lot, and I'm telling you about them now as I weep. And what does he say about this many people out there? They are enemies of the cross. How many in here would like to say, I'm an enemy of the cross? This is not a good place to be, right? An enemy of the cross is not the side you want to be on. Paul calls them enemies of the cross of Christ. And by the way, as enemies of the cross of Christ, where are they headed? Destruction. Yeah. If you deny the cross of Christ, you will spend eternity in hell. That's just the reality. But then he begins to tell you, you say, well, what does that mean? They're enemies of the cross of Christ. What are the characteristics of an enemy of the cross of Christ? How would you spot an enemy of the cross of Christ? What do they do? What do they talk like? What do they think like? What do they act like? And he gives you 3 criteria to help you spot someone who's an enemy of the cross of Christ. And what's the first one? Their God is their appetite. Literally, their God is their belly. What do you think that means? Like oh belly, I worship you belly, right? You think that's what they're doing? Nah. They prioritize their desires. All they can think about in this life is getting something to gratify their flesh, right? They go through this day, they go through life, and they don't give any thought whatsoever to treasure in heaven, pleasing God, serving the Lord, their eternal inheritance. It's just all, what can I get to make this body happy? And it's as though, literally, their belly is their master. And so whatever my belly wants, that's what I'm going to do. Whatever my flesh wants, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do whatever makes my gut happy. That's how you know they're an enemy of the cross of Christ. What's the second one? Their glory is in their shame. What do you think that means? Oh, very good, yeah. They're proud of their sin. They do sinful things, shameful things, and yet they're happy about it. They brag about it, right? You guys that have been in the locker room, it's the stuff guys talk about in the locker room. Probably they do it in girls' locker rooms too. But it's the stuff they talk about. Half the time it's the stuff that's talked about in coffee shops or co-ops or beauty shops or wherever else anybody gathers. They brag and talk about the sinful things that they love. It has nothing to do with the glory of God. It's just bragging about sin. And they think it's funny and they love it and they glory in it. And what's the third characteristic of somebody who's an enemy of the cross of Christ? Yeah. They're focused on everything down here. Get all you can all you get, sit on the can, poison the rest, right? That's what they do. They just want this world and as much of it as they can get. And they don't care about anything eternal. Give me Egypt. I just want Egypt. And I want more of Egypt and more of Egypt and more of Egypt. And there's no thought whatsoever to anything beyond Egypt. I just want this place. And Paul says, don't be like them. Do you want to see the difference? Paul explains a Christian in verse 20. For our citizenship is in heaven. That word citizenship is an interesting word that we use. How many of you have ever traveled outside of the country? Anybody? None of you? How many over here have traveled outside of the country? Just a handful, yeah? So they're going to give you a passport when you travel. And that passport is your identification that what? You're a U.S. citizen. And even though you're on foreign soil, whether you're on Africa or China or Guatemala or wherever else you've gone, you are a U.S. citizen. And you remain a U.S. citizen. Now, you may be on foreign soil, but you're a U.S. citizen. And you still maintain the rights and privileges of being a U.S. citizen. And if you ever do travel with a passport, anybody that knows about travel will tell you, guard that U.S. passport with your life, because people in third world countries would give an arm and a leg for a U.S. passport. That's a powerful document to people around the world. People in Africa that I've met, pastors in Africa that wanted to come over here, they wrote letters, I wrote letters, they begged, they plead, and the United States government says, you're not coming in here, which is kind of ironic these days. But point is, you don't just come. To have a U.S. passport, to say you're a citizen of heaven, the land of the free, the home of the brave, right? I mean, this is a big, big deal to the rest of the world to be born a citizen of the United States. Now, Paul wasn't an American, but Paul had a pretty phenomenal citizenship in this world. Does anybody know what citizenship he had? He was a Roman citizen. Rome ruled the world. I mean, and it was big. It got Paul out of trouble a time or two. To be a Roman citizen was a big deal. In fact, there's one Roman guard that said, I acquired citizenship through a large sum of money. I had to pay a lot to become a Roman citizen. And Paul said, I was born a Roman citizen. What a privilege. And yet Paul says, Rome schmome, right? Who cares? I don't care about being a Roman. My passport, stamp it what? Heaven. I'm a citizen of heaven. And you know what I'm waiting for? I'm not waiting for the next Roman emperor. I'm not waiting for the next politician. I'm not waiting for the next tax refund. I'm not waiting for the next Christmas bonus. I'm waiting for one thing. What? A Savior. I'm waiting for my King. I am looking to my earthly or my heavenly city, and I am waiting for my heavenly King. And when he comes, he will transform the body of our humble state, meaning all of our sinfulness. He will instantly make us like him. He will transform us into the conformity with the body of his glory. And he'll do it because he has the power to subject anything to himself. If he wants to tell a turtle to fly, that dude will take off, right? If he tells it to, it will. If he tells darkness to become light, it becomes light. If he tells water to become wine, it becomes wine. If he tells the ocean to be still, it's still. If he tells leprosy to leave, it's gone. If he tells withered hands to restore, they come back. If he tells the dead to live, they live. And if he tells us in our sinful state to be holy, we will be holy in a moment like him. And Paul said, that's my hope. That's what I fix my eyes on. That's what I'm looking for. That's what the cross accomplishes in us. And so when I tell you about Jacob's perspective to his sons, to say, sons, do not look at this world. Look beyond Egypt. That's not a suggestion. That's a command. Fix your eyes on things above, not on things of this earth. Sinners who will die in hell are focused on this life. That's true. It is those who look beyond this life for a coming king that will be saved. If you got your hope here and your desires here and all your coveting of stuff here, I'm going to tell you, you need to repent of that. You need to tell God you're sorry that you have chosen to take the crumbs when he would have offered to you the banquet. When you've chosen to take the world when he offers to you the king. That's a sin before God. And that has to be repented of. And you have to confess Christ and trust in him. Set your eyes there. Does that make sense? All right. Let's pray, guys. Nate's up first, and then we'll go to Quincy and go around.
Father God, I pray you help us down this path of life and go along the path you set ahead of us.
Dear Lord, please help everyone through everything they're going through and everything they will go through, and help everyone get better if they are sick.
Lord, thank you for letting us meet here today and hear your word. Please let us just apply it to our lives and get the right mindset out of us.
Dear Lord, please help us to have our mindset to you, Lord, to our life in heaven and not the earthly things that will satisfy us.
On God, pray for my dreamy hope of being better, Father, and help me sing good at Christmas, Father, and help me. In Jesus' name, pray. Amen.
Dear Lord, we come before you tonight, and Lord, I just thank you for the day that you've given us. Lord, I ask that you would put your hand on our community, Lord, and just bless us with health, Lord, that you would stop the sickness that's spreading.
Dear Lord,
Please save us, please keep us, Lord. Please keep everyone healthy, and please everyone safe in you.
dear Father, we just thank you for being alive, just when we have those who are asleep at night, and those who don't know you, that you would draw them close to you. Thanks for letting us be here tonight and hear your word, and thank you for your things.
God, can you please help all of us understand the word better and to just hear it? And God, thank you for leading me. And can you please help us do it?
Lord, I just pray you take away our love for worldly things, Lord, that we would seek things of this world, but that you set our eyes on things above. That you set our eyes on your kingdom.
Father, we do thank you for your grace and your mercy upon us that we so seek your son